Welcome everyone to AE911Truth Webinars. I'm Richard Gage, AIA member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. For 10 years, we have been at it and putting dents in the wall of ignorance, obfuscation, denial, and fraudulence and lies. And you're going to see why today. I've been an architect for 28 years now, and I was just shocked to learn about. It was about 4 years after 9/11 that there was any alternative story as to what happened. I didn't hear anything on the media from my colleagues about controlled demolition or anything like that. And David Ray Griffin was being interviewed that morning on the Guns and Butter program, and I was just shocked, literally, just to hear this evidence that I'd not heard anything about. This can't be true. I would have heard about it by now. Then I realized, well, they couldn't have kept it a secret. Well, these are the kinds of questions that all of us are going to have after we hear the evidence today. And we are indeed in week one of the Architects and Engineers webinar series of 4 series altogether. Today we're looking at the overview of WTC 7. But before we begin, I want to introduce you to Andy Steele, our operations coordinator, and he's got a couple of announcements for us.
Sure. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Just want to remind everybody that YouTube defaults to a low resolution. So if you want to see the slides in a higher resolution, simply click the gearbox beneath the screen, select 720 HD resolution, and that will fix the problem for you. And we're also going to be accepting questions today on the subject matter that Richard is going to be going over in this webinar. So to submit the questions, all you got to do is type them into the question box at AE911Truth.org/webinars. Hit submit, and the questions will be coming to us, and we encourage them. So that's it. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks so much, Andy. And let's definitely look at this third tower that came down on 9/11. Most architects and engineers are completely unfamiliar, as I was, when, 4 or 5 years later, after 9/11, didn't know there was a 47-story skyscraper that dropped as in the manner you'll see in the afternoon of 9/11. We're going to look at the scientific method. We're going to look at the evidence of explosions, how normal office fires could or could not, most likely could not, most definitely could not bring this building down in the manner you'll see. Pyroclastic flows, foreknowledge, experts, all of that is what we're going to be looking at today. And also, Andy and I want to tell you that if you're not aware yet, we are putting together the most important conference we feel the 9/11 Truth movement has ever put together in its 15-year history. And here we have assembled over a dozen attorneys, including renowned attorney, public interest attorney Daniel Sheehan of the Pentagon Papers, the Iran-Contra scandal, the Karen Silkwood case. He is coming out and helping us publicly to look at the evidence critically, weigh it against the standards for getting prosecutions, getting the evidence disclosed in the court system, along with Judge Ferdinando Impasamato, the honorary Supreme Court president of Italy, in Italy. And this is very exciting, and a dozen other high-level attorneys, as you'll see. Now, this is all, you can learn more about all of this, which will include the launch of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and the group of attorneys that is dedicated to helping 9/11 Truth move forward in the court system, which you can help also. The launching of the Truth Action Project, dedicated to organizing hundreds and hundreds of groups around the country to educate the public and the professionals and the elected representatives, media, etc. Also, we have many other speakers: Wayne Madsen, J. Michael Springman, Lionel from Lionel Media in New York, many others. We'll tell you more about that coming up. But go to 911justiceinfocus.org. That's 911justiceinfocus.org. You can learn more, and it'll be live streamed. So if you can't make it to New York, guess what? You can get it at home. Just go to 911justiceinfocus.org. And back to World Trade Center 7, where, by the way, in New York, we indeed will be giving a 2-hour presentation with 8 experts, including Stephen Dusterwald, structural engineer, David Chandler, physics teacher, John Cole, civil engineer, Niels Harrit, chemist, Stephen Jones, nuclear physicist, all on this evidence for all 3 towers in a space of 2 hours, 9 experts. Don't miss it. Sunday morning, September 11th. And you can get it on live stream. And if you are hearing this afterward, you can definitely see the archive. It's the same link. Just go to 911justiceinfocus.org. And so I just want you to know a little about my history here. I've been working in steel frame buildings, these particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area at this high school, with these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums, and this $125 million high school for which I had the construction administration experience. More recently, this $400 million project in Las Vegas, Nevada, near Las Vegas, and 6 blocks of retail and mid-rise office space, altogether 1,200 tons of steel framing. But I had to leave all of this work in order to get the word out to the American people, the professionals, the government, the media, about what really happened on 9/11. And I'm joined by dozens of high-quality volunteers and a handful of staff, such as Andy, that have been invaluable in getting this word out. Now, I'm joined by also 2,700 now architects and engineers who are calling for a new investigation of the destruction of all 3 of these World Trade Center skyscrapers. They're staking their reputations and their name on the getting the truth out, taking a stand, saying, hey, something is not right. These buildings did not come down due to fire and jet plane impacts and so forth. This evidence is on our website. I encourage you to take a look at it. AE911Truth.org. That's architects and engineers for 911Truth, AE911Truth.org, in case you miss it. We're going to go fast. And people say, oh, it's been 15 years. Why don't you just let this go? Well, guess what? 9/11 spawned 2 major wars. 2 million people have been killed. $4.5 trillion global war on terror is ensuing, and we're still paying for that. In fact, your children and their children will be paying for that indefinitely, and it'll go on and on, as we promised, a war without end. This all goes back to 9/11, including the loss of our civil liberties through legislated acts such as the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, in which any of us can be arrested without charge, without a lawyer, without a right to a trial. We can basically be disappeared indefinitely. This is not the America that our forefathers fought for, including a host of other critical issues that all go back, it can be argued, to 9/11. So if there's any question about what happened at 9/11, and these 3 towers are at the heart of that question, and very serious, numerous questions, then we have to go back. It is our duty, as painful as it might be, as uncomfortable and inconvenient as these truths are. This evidence shows, the implications reveal. But we start with the scientific method, because that's what we've had for 100 years or so in our society. So what do? We have a question. How did the towers come down? That's where we're starting today. Well, we lay out all of the information based on our background research, observations. We then construct a hypothesis. Well, how have other towers come down? lay out all the competing hypotheses without prejudice, without our own subjective bias, without a political agenda. And we look at them one by one. I think they came down by fire. Maybe jet plane impacts. Maybe it was explosions. Let's lay out all of them and test them with experiments, analyze the results, draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner so all can build on the body of our work. This is very important for us in the West. We build on the body of 100 years of research, and it's open. It's not put away in a black box. We don't hide our input data, for instance, for the World Trade Center Building 7 computer analysis that NIST did. And yes, they hid that. We've tried to get that released through a FOIA request, and what were we told? It might jeopardize public safety. What? No. The architects and engineers are tasked with ensuring the public safety. We need to know how this building, all three of these buildings, came down exactly. Don't hide your input data for your computer in which you try to prove that this building came down due to normal office fires in the case of Building 7, as we'll see. Well, we're going to apply the scientific method by gathering data. Let's look at what are the forces that have destroyed buildings previously. Well, fire is certainly one of them. It burns through an area every 20 minutes or so in an office building. That's all the fuel there is there. It moves on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So when buildings come down due to fire, and as you'll see, never have they in the case of steel frame buildings, steel frame skyscrapers, or any skyscraper. But in the case of wood frame buildings, it will move through a building and burn out area, and its structure will begin to collapse asymmetrically. It'll through the tons of structure that's still intact below. Well, let's look at some examples here. We've had plenty, up to 100 examples of very hot, large, and long-lasting fires in these buildings. But not even in Los Angeles do we have the collapse of this building, which burned 3.5 hours over 5 floors, or in Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors, or in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. Okay, let's log this information we're gathering one at a time and just put it on the shelf and remember. Because here's an example of buildings that fell over due to earthquakes, an organic process, a natural collapse. The building doesn't fall straight down through the path of greatest resistance. It tips over. The concrete structure in this case is not pulverized to a fine powder. We can see a building that is broken up certainly, but recognizable as a building. Put this on the shelf and keep it in mind as we proceed and look at what else can be done, such as buildings being exploded. So here's an example of large, thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds with plumes that are indicative of massive heat being released. And this is, we'll look carefully at what this means. But we also have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. If we have these features, we know we have explosions. That's pretty important. Now, explosions can be harnessed very carefully and engineered and placed throughout a building such as this, and designed to bring it down, straight down, symmetrically usually, and often at free fall acceleration, because the structure is completely compromised, synchronistically timed floor by floor. So we have a few features that are typical of controlled demolitions. What are they? We have a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure, a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove those column supports, resulting in a free fall speed, or acceleration more appropriately, through the path of greatest resistance, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. So it's broken up, ready for loading and shipment. That's the idea, to get that building out of there efficiently. Minimal damage, of course, to adjacent structures. Sounds and flashes heard and seen by witnesses. Enormous clouds of pulverized concrete because of the explosions. Squibs, or isolated explosive ejections, visible at various floors, going off at a time that's perhaps different than the rest of them, so making them more uniquely visible and questionable. Chemical evidence, of course, left behind in the cutter charges. This is all direct evidence of explosive destruction. And guess what? Fire can't accomplish any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. That's pretty important, because you can begin to see here we're weighing the hypothesis of destruction by fire against the hypothesis of destruction by explosions. Well, typical controlled demolitions have government documentation that can be very helpful. Experts agree, at least those experts who don't have biases, who have, say, $100,000 contracts with the federal government and might be inclined to weigh more favorably toward producing and securing their paycheck. Foreknowledge of the destruction. They're known months in advance, of course. So experts and others, it takes many operatives, to engineer, place, and plant these explosives. It can take months. Video documentation, of course, all this is proof of controlled demolition. So this is the model that we would use to try to determine destruction by fire versus destruction by controlled demolition. So let's apply that model to World Trade Center Building 7. You may or may not be aware of this third tower that was destroyed on 9/11. Most architects and engineers are unaware. How do we know that? Because we are at 2, 3, 4 this year alone conventions, AIA conventions, American Institute of Architects, of which I'm a member. We go, we show Building 7. We ask, do you know what this is? They say, yeah, that's a controlled demolition. Do you know when this happened? No, why? Because it happened on 9/11. This is the third tower. Did you know there was a third tower? No. That is predominantly the answer we get. So we know how well informed architects and engineers are, how uninformed they are. And in this case, this building's 350 feet or so away from the North Tower, and it was not hit by an airplane. So it's a special case. We can set aside the Twin Towers until 2 weeks from Thursday. We'll let you know. There's a schedule on our website, by the way, at AE911Truth.org. And click on AE911Truth Webinars on the lower right. You'll see a banner there. This is the third high-rise to collapse on 9/11. And so you can see the layout here and how Building 7 survived the collapse of Buildings 1 and 2. Throughout the afternoon, in fact, it had some small amount of damage, which NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain this collapse to the American people. They said it wasn't due to damage. That was an insignificant factor in the building's collapse. We'll get to what they say was the significant factors, but let's look at the behavior of the building itself and compare it to the typical features of a controlled demolition. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the tower? Well, let's take a listen to Daryl, a medical student who's on hand, an eyewitness to this collapse.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and you know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and you know, it was horrifying. Then you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You know, we were in shock, and then the worst part.
A sound of a clap of thunder, a shockwave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. That's a pretty important sequence of events from eyewitnesses, and there's several others. But let's take a look at Dan Rather, who's listening to and watching the collapse of this structure in what for many of us may be our first view of this building's collapse.
And what you're seeing are high shocks. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent.
Let's start that one over.
Those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, here's Dan Rather using his intuition to describe what he's seeing, because, you know, we've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas. This is, in fact, what it looks like, and Dan is suggesting that that's his best guess. We should all be using our intuition rather than what we're told by authority. It's increasingly important in this day and age, and yet people don't do that, myself included. 4 or 5 years after 9/11, I didn't question how the Twin Towers came down. I mean, it looked really weird, and I'll show you what I mean by that as we compare it to what we were told and what the evidence actually shows when you focus in. We'll do that in a couple of weeks. So far, though, do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Key feature number 2. Well, take a look for yourself. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. Very interesting. Look at the penthouse. The penthouse, the main penthouse and screen wall, drop uniformly a half a second prior to the overall collapse of this building. We'll get to the east penthouse, which drops 6 seconds later. But this indicates that all core columns, 24 of them in this case, had to have been removed at once. This alone violates the key tenet of the initiation collapse theory by NIST, which says that it moved across the building in at least a dozen or 2 dozen seconds. So that's critically important for you to realize as a critically thinking American or citizen of any country. Let's put them side by side and see how it stacks up visually. A known controlled demolition on the right, building 7 on the left. A series of controlled demolitions on the right, in fact, just to make darn sure that we've got our ducks in a row here. Yes, in fact, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, all of them. And yet NIST never seriously examined the hypothesis of controlled demolition, even though it looks exactly like one, even though fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a skyscraper. No. We're not buying it. And that's why you have 2,700 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. What did NIST say brought this fire down, this building? These fires right here. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of. focused here on the 13th floor. We'll talk about this fire because it is the area of the initiation of collapse, according to NIST. So these fires burning early afternoon, 2:30 or 3 p.m., are said to have brought this building down. Now we're going to look at that critically. But let's see first, how do they bring a high-rise building straight down into its own footprint? Well, they have to remove all of these 87 columns, or 82, at once. And so this is this can fire do this? Does fire have this level of precision to remove all those columns at once? Remember, this building would have tipped over in any kind of natural collapse, because fires and earthquakes and other natural forces do not cause uniform symmetrical collapses. The focus of NIST is on column 79. We'll look at that initiation collapse theory in a moment. But how fast is this building coming down? Well, let's take a look. You can see it gaining downward momentum second by second, greater and greater distance. This means acceleration. And if you look at the free fall curve, indeed, it fits it almost perfectly. And that means the building's coming down as fast as a bowling ball falling off the side of it in under 7 seconds. It's as if 8 stories were removed, because that is the amount of distance over which it fell at free fall for a third of its 7-second fall. That is incredible. NIST actually acknowledges this, but they do not acknowledge the implications of free fall. They were forced into acknowledging this, by the way, in their final report after being publicly confronted by David Chandler, one of the AE911Truth petition signers, physics teacher. And they say, oh, yeah, you're right. And in the final report, they acknowledge this, but no implications. In fact, they actually state that it's consistent with their earlier results, which denied free fall. It's quite a mess, that report. Do we have the total dismemberment of the steel structure? Well, take a look. A 47-story skyscraper has been reduced to a pile 4 or 5 stories tall. That means all the concrete, all of the, the steel columns as well as the concrete floors had to have been compromised. The steel columns compromised, the concrete floors pulverized, as we'll see. Like a house of cards. This is a moment-resisting steel frame building. If it would have fallen in a natural collapse, remember, you would have seen something like natural collapses, the building recognizable, certainly broken up, damaged, irreparable, of course, but not this kind of pile that you see here like a house of cards. Are there sounds of explosions that are heard by witnesses? Let's listen to Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. And it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Wow. That's very, very helpful information. Perhaps this and the other witnesses made it into the 1,000-page report that was comprehensive after hundreds of witnesses were interviewed. Nope. Let's listen to another one.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
And Barry Jennings, who was on the 23rd floor working, The building was evacuated after the towers were hit by the planes, but before they came down. And he apparently, along with Michael Hess, the attorney for Mayor Giuliani, had wandered back into the building, not realizing that it was evacuated. This is his experience and the experience of his co-worker, Michael Hess.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions. What sort of sound? Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Gary Jennings would not relent on this testimony. And unfortunately, he met a mysterious death that nobody can get to the bottom of. That is very, very unfortunate. That happened the day before the final report came out, which was 7 years later after 9/11. Officials were juggling this report, the explanation of this collapse, trying to make sense out of it. We'll get to that in a moment. But here's another. Explosions, not included in the official report, but on the afternoon of 9/11, heard in the adjacent to Building 7 by these witnesses.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
They say that these are not explosions, but of buildings collapsing. Well, you decide for yourself. Enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete. This happens in some controlled demolitions. In fact, the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations is the guide that is used by fire protection engineers, investigators. NIST actually helped create this document. And what does it say? Well, look for large volumes of gas and a large amount of heat released in chemical explosions, causing rapidly expanding plumes of hot gases. Well, these were observed directly before and after the final destruction of this building. As you can see yourself racing away in every direction from the collapse of this building, these rapidly expanding cauliflower-shaped plumes from the massive heat. They were described, the witnesses described incredible heat in these clouds. And that's much, much hotter than the few small fires that you had in this building. Where did that heat come from? We'll be looking at that next week, actually. Well, some of it, yes, and the week after, much, much hotter temperatures from different sources that is documented by so many people and videos and photographs. We'll get to that in the coming weeks, mostly. For now, though, these first 8 key characteristic features, we believe this is direct evidence of explosive destruction and that fire cannot account for any of them, let alone all of them. So that's a real important way station along our path of discerning what happened here. We apply our critical thinking skills to this massive problem that's in our face as Americans about this third tower. Well, speaking of fires, if we were going to have the collapse of any of the World Trade Center skyscrapers, we would expect, I think, it to be this one at World Trade Center 5, which was huge, completely engulfed, as you can see. Did it come down? No. Fireproofed mid-rise and high-rise structures do not collapse due to fire. Never have and never will. It just doesn't happen, not even in China with this fully engulfed fire in the Mandarin Hotel here in 2009. And of course, we've had several fires like this in the Middle East, interestingly enough, that have never come down. Fully engulfed. Did it come down? Well, here's the before on the left and the after on the right, slightly toasted around the edges, still in commission, I think it's actually still being fixed. It was an extremely expensive renovation. But these small fires are said to have brought this massive skyscraper, 47 stories tall, each floor the size of a football field, down in 6.5 seconds. No, we are not buying it. It's the first time ever, unprecedented. Well, let's look at the reports that came out regarding this. FEMA did the first report in the first couple of years. In May of 2002, they came out, and what did they conclude? The specifics of the fire in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. What? Unknown? The best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. Wait, what do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and you construct another one that has a higher probability of occurrence. They did not have that opportunity because the investigation was taken over by NIST. They do suggest, though, further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. But for those hoping to resolve the issue, unfortunately, the evidence was illegally destroyed in this crime scene. 400 truckloads a day, beginning 2 weeks after 9/11, was shipped to China for recycling before forensic investigators could even look at it and determine how this unprecedented collapse even happened. Crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, says Bill Manning, the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, showing the astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. Well, what do other experts say? Here's the top European controlled demolition expert in the country. And we go not in the country, but outside the country, because we have to go outside in order to find a controlled demolition company, and there's only a handful in the world. They have massive federal contracts. They don't seem to be telling the truth. Maybe they want to keep those contracts. I don't know. But the top European controlled demolition expert Danny Jowenko was shown the collapse of this structure on a laptop. No, they didn't tell him when it happened. What does he say? It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Professional work, without a doubt. Well, then they say, well, did you know this happened on 9/11? And he says, really? And he says, no. And they say, yeah, 9/11. Yeah, look, it's the third tower that came down. He says, well, they must have worked very fast. Of course, he knows they can't work that fast in a burning building because it had some fires in it. And they're not going to be going in there on the day afternoon of and setting thousands of explosives in a smoke-filled, out-of-control situation. No. He's trying to make sense of it, but he can't. He lost his life, unfortunately, as well in mysterious car accident. Foreknowledge of the destruction. Remember, you can't just go and do a controlled demolition. You need approval. So it takes months of planning and engineering. Well, so if people know about it is the point here. And here's these mysterious construction workers walking away from building 7, hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder, and then looking straight in at building 7, and then looking straight into the CNN camera, saying this,
Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down. Building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys.
We are looking back. It's a building about to blow up. Flame, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down, that thing's coming down. How do they know this building, which has a few small scattered office fires, is going to come down? Well, the firefighters were told, hey, this building's going to come down. It has some structural damage. But structural damage was ultimately completely dismissed by NIST as a significant cause of this building's failure. They cite normal office fires. So what's really going on here? They moved everybody back 6 blocks away. And this gentleman, who was a witness of the explosions you heard earlier, was listening to a Red Cross worker, a radio in the hand of this Red Cross worker, and he repeats what he heard.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
And the guy says, just run for your life, just run for your life. I don't know why they said that, but do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? No, something else is going on here. Something besides structural damage. In fact, Jane Stanley of the BBC announces the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it ever happened, announcing the unprecedented collapse before it ever happened. They apologize for this grievous error later, citing the confusing events of the day. Yeah, they got something wrong, apparently, the order of events. But so did CNN, who announced the collapse at that morning, 15 minutes or so after the towers came down. Let's listen.
In New York, Alan Dobbs Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan.
So here's the building still standing, and they're announcing the collapse of it. 50 stories went down, according to a firefighter. Well, no other 50-story building went down, and there was no other building that went down. This is the only building besides the Twin Towers that collapsed on 9/11. The others sustained some pretty incredible damage, but they didn't collapse. Here's a building that sustained insignificant damage, according to NIST, and it didn't collapse. And yet they're announcing the collapse of what can only be it. Well, had this building collapsed at 10:45, when the firefighter said it went down, we wouldn't even have videos of it. It would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud that was everywhere in Lower Manhattan after the Twin Towers came down. So some people speculate that it was supposed to go down at that time, and that they spent the rest of the afternoon with a lot of confusion and sending mysterious construction workers into the building, maybe to fix that dud. I mean, we don't know that. That's speculation. But what's not speculation is the amount of data we've assembled here that appears on the surface of it and the depth of it to corroborate the hypothesis of explosive demolition. We're today seeing the first 8 key characteristic features of controlled demolition. Fire not being able to account for any one of them, we believe, with additional circumstantial corroborating evidence, foreknowledge, testimony of first responders, experts. This is, in our opinion, proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt, certainly. And this is our opinion, the opinion of 2,700 architects and engineers, and we want to know what you think. It doesn't matter what we think. We're here to educate the profession, politicians, the media, and the public. And one question that comes up so often is, well, you know, how could they have gotten in this building to do it? Well, of course, who are they is another question, but who's in this building? This is a very secure building, one of the most secure outside the Pentagon. Look at the CIA is in here, the Secret Service, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, the bunker on the 23rd floor where Barry Jennings worked. Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission, where the fires were worse, lost thousands of files related to hundreds of high-profile cases against Wall Street companies and others like Enron, WorldCom. All of this severely compromised the prosecution of these cases. So we certainly want an investigation of those fires. And of course, the security company under whose noses would have to have been brought tons of materials that should not have been in this building, and that we'll discover in the next couple of weeks in this webinar series. That is evidence of controlled demolition, physical forensic evidence. But you can take some action if you don't buy the official story of destruction by office fires. You can sign our petition. You can become a member of AE911Truth for as little as $2.50 a month. That's how we're able to do what we do here every day on behalf of waking up the sleeping American public and the public around the world to the devastation that was caused and is still ongoing as a result of 9/11, the heart of which is the destruction of these towers. The implication of the controlled demolition is even more devastating to many of our belief systems. We want to believe that nothing like this could happen here in America, that there are checks and balances in place to keep high-level individuals from getting away with this kind of illicit, evil activity. Now, we don't have theories about all of that. What we have is evidence. And this evidence is hard enough to get in front of people, to encourage them to look at it. I really appreciate that our viewers today have taken the opportunity to stop and examine this evidence. And I encourage you to donate to AE911Truth and to volunteer. We need many, many volunteers. We have lots of tasks to reach the public, the profession, and Andy's here to help us learn more about that opportunity.
Absolutely, Richard. As I say many times here on this webinar, if you are inspired by this information, you want to go out and do something to educate others, reach out to professional organizations and politicians. We certainly do need your help because we got a lot of tasks that we need to find people to fill and help out with. So go up to the top of this webpage, AE911Truth.org. Click the What You Can Do tab, and then there gives you the option to volunteer. A very quick and simple application to fill out. And once you do that, we will be in touch with you. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Andy. And guess what? There's things you can do on your own, too. You can send the AE911Truth.org link to every architect and engineer that you can find, everybody else that you know, your elected representatives, television, radio, newspaper. This is how you can do your part. People say, oh, what can I do? I can't do anything. I'm just one person. Well, guess what? A lot of one persons have done a lot of spreading around. The 9/11 Truth movement is composed of millions of people doing what we're asking you to do locally. You can make a difference in your community by screening the DVDs, speaking to new audiences if you like to speak, but at least email the AE911 Truth resources. I'll show you some resources here. In fact, we're creating the best one ever at AE911 Truth with a $300,000 computer study by one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Leroy Halsey of the University of Alaska. So here's a 2-year study we're in the middle of, and it needs funding. And you can help fund that at WTC7evaluation.org. And you can learn more. There's a video there. Also, send the PDF of the Beyond Misinformation 55-page booklet, which gives all this evidence and shows why the NIST theory of initiation of collapse for all 3 of these buildings makes no sense whatsoever. This is not overly technical. It can be read by not just architects and engineers, but others as well. And you can get it for free. Just click on the Beyond Misinformation link below on our website there, or on our newsletters. Just sign up for the AE911Truth news flashes, and you'll get a free PDF link to this incredible booklet that we've been distributing 50,000 times now. Not just people who are activist types that are doing things, but directly to professionals ourselves we've done as well. But it takes both. Our landmark DVD is called 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, which contains 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence, as you can see right ahead here in this 2-minute trailer.
Conspiracy theories. You know, there are lots of them that can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
And yes, indeed, you too can organize a screening of this incredible film. In fact, you can see this film for free right now on YouTube, the 58-minute version. Just go on YouTube and search Experts Speak Out. And there's a 90-minute film available on at our store, which is located in the, quote, "What Can You Do" section, or what you can do. And we have another film that we've just completed a 70-city tour of this year. Firefighters, architects, and engineers expose 9/11 myths. We were throughout Europe as well. And Eric Lawyer is featured in this film. He is the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and Unity. They have 200 firefighters supporting a new investigation. And this is incredible. You can also see this on YouTube. The 58-minute version. Just search Firefighters, Architects, and Engineers. And then you can also get the 90-minute version. The 90-minute version includes a lot more evidence that we just couldn't fit into the 58-minute version. And that's available in our store. So we've looked today at an overview of WTC 7. Next week, we're going to go into more depth with a review, but also what did the American Society of Civil Engineers, FEMA, and NIST say in their reports? What about the computer simulation that they had, their initiation of collapse theory, the analysis of these fires, and looking at what other structural engineers say? So be sure to join us Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, this coming Thursday. Right now, though, I believe we have some questions. Is that true, Andy?
Yeah, our first question asks us, how do they specifically say if the fires originated in WTC 7?
Well, they do imply that the fires were caused by debris that hit the Building 7 when the North Tower came down at 10 o'clock. But the fires weren't even noticed until noon. And they were out. As we'll see next week in our in-depth analysis of these fires, they were out over an hour before the collapse of this building in the area around column 79 in the northeast section of floor 12. They were out an hour before, so they could not have caused the collapse of this building according to NIST's initiation of collapse theory. That'll be a fascinating subject of discovery next week.
Okay, our next question is one we get very often. What about the jet fuel stored in the tanks? I heard they exploded and that caused the collapse.
Well, early on, NIST was responsible for feeding misinformation, we believe, to popular mechanics who ran with this story about the diesel fuel being responsible because for these fires, because there was diesel fuel in this building, because there were emergency generators in the building. But these were on the 5th floor, which you can see in the picture in front of you in the lower right. The dark section of this building is the 5th floor. Those are louvers designed to ventilate that 5th floor. And there's no fires on that floor where the diesel fuel was. So NIST had to retract that assertion, and popular mechanics never did retract it.
Okay, our next question asks, and this is a common one we often get too, were there any defects in World Trade Center 7 that might have caused it to collapse so fast instead of explosives?
Well, NIST says that the structure is not at fault per se. They did, and we'll look at this in depth next week, but they did cite expansion of long span thermal beams pushing a girder off of its seat, causing floor 13 to fall on 12, 12 on 10, etc., causing the internal pancake and collapse and failure, which then traveled vertically and then laterally across this building, inside the building, all before the clean, neat, symmetrical free fall collapse that we see in the videos. So none of that could have happened for a variety of reasons we'll get into next week. But particularly, this building is fireproof. Those beams could not have expanded. There's only 20 minutes of fire available in a particular area in any office building. But nevertheless, yes, there are hundreds of buildings with long span beams in them, high-rise buildings, that are apparently subject to free fall acceleration collapse due to normal office fires if what we see here is true. But while recommendations for structural changes were made by NIST in these buildings, none were adopted by the International Building Code of Conference of Building Code Officials. So it's a real quandary and problem, because firefighters are tasked with going into and fighting these fires. And if these buildings can come down on them like this due to a few small scattered office fires, they have a huge problem that they have not addressed either.
Okay, our last question asks about Barry Jennings. It says, from my understanding, Barry Jennings was trapped with another man. Has that man or the firefighters commented on the things Jennings reported?
Michael Hess is the other man in question. He's the attorney for Mayor Giuliani. He was in the building with Jennings. They were experiencing explosions, hearing explosions. They were blown from the back into the 8th floor as they were descending down the 7th floor from an explosion that happened on the 6th floor. Jennings said the lobby was decimated as if a huge bomb went off there. In between the time he entered through that lobby and the time that they were rescued and brought back down through that lobby. And Michael Hess later changed his story, and he lives, he said, oh, that was the building, the Twin Towers coming down. But the evidence clearly shows that they were rescued before the Twin Towers came down, or these explosions at least happened before the Twin Towers ever came down.
All right, well, that is going to conclude it for the question and answer session and for the webinar. As Richard said, please come back on Thursday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. That's 4 o'clock Eastern time for the next in this webinar series. We want to thank everybody for watching, and have a great night.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it, and we will look forward to seeing you Thursday. Take care and get the word out. Thanks.